Hey there, good to see you. Today in this video, we're going to take a look at a new collection of Maven filters, a second wave of filters, which are now available for backing through a crowdfunding campaign over at Kickstarter. And by the way, at any point during this video, if you want to hop over to Kickstarter and check out all of the filters that are now available for backing and check out pricing and all that good stuff, there is a link down below in the video description you may use. Before we get going here, I do need to let you know that Maven did provide me with all of the filters that you are going to see in this video. However, they have not paid for this video. They have not sponsored this video. They've had no editorial input in this video. Everything that you're going to hear in this video is my honest and unbiased opinion about the filters and my experience using them. Okay, so if you did not see my review of the first wave of Maven filters from about a year ago, you're welcome to check it out up here if you want to, but I'll just quickly summarize that video for you and tell you that I was impressed with these filters. I was impressed with them then, and I'm still impressed with them. I still like them. I've been using them throughout the past year. I think they're really well made. I think they're, the construction is good. The design is good. They're very thin. They're very lightweight, easy to pack and carry along. Good filters for doing both photo and video work, which is what I, obviously. Okay, so in this second wave of filters, Maven is now offering a 2-stop solid ND and a 4-stop solid ND. And as you can see, they both have unique colors. The only thing I don't like about this particular color, and I know this is going to be really nitpicky, but this is the 6-stop solid ND from the first wave here, and this is here's the new 4-stop. And yeah, I mean, they do look rather similar, right? I mean, I kind of feel like they're a little too similar for my taste. I wish the 4-stop used a different color. But anyway, 2 and 4 stops. So those are kind of unusual, right? I mean, usually when you buy a solid ND, usually you have an option between 3 stops, 6 stops, 10 stops. I think the majority, I think the people who will get the most value out of these filters and the people who will be most interested in them are people who shoot video, whether you are a full-time videographer or if you are a photographer like me who also does video too. Having additional solid ND densities is helpful and is really cool when you are trying to follow the 180-degree shutter rule, because without going down a rabbit hole here, as you probably know, when you're doing so, you set your shutter speed to a fixed value, and oftentimes your ISO is set to a particular value too, whatever is optimal for, especially if you're shooting in log on your camera, which means then the only exposure control you typically have is aperture and an ND filter on the front. And I found oftentimes when I would go out and shoot, oftentimes a 3-stop ND would end up being too dark. So I would have to raise my ISO a little bit, which would introduce noise and that kind of stuff. But now there is the option of 2 stops instead. So if 3 stops is too dark, I can just throw the 2-stop filter on and use this one instead. And it's the same scenario with the 6-stop filter. If you're shooting outdoors, you're shooting video on a super bright sunny day, and you throw the 6-stop on and the 6-stop is a little too much and your exposure takes a nosedive and you have to bump the ISO, well, instead of using 6, you can use the 4 instead. I really like this. I ended up using the 2 and 4 stop filters quite a lot during my recent trip out west when I was shooting a lot of a video. I found myself constantly going between the 3, the 2, and the 4. Every now and then I needed the 6, but for the most part, 2, 3, and 4 were perfect. Concerning color cast, both the 2 and the 4-stop solid ND are very color accurate, very color neutral. They contribute little to no color cast at all to photos and videos, very similar to the first wave of Maven solid NDs that I reviewed, which is good because it means then that they're not going to affect the colors in your image. They're not going to change the image in such a way so that it's obvious which photos or videos were shot with a solid ND and which ones were not. Like they look more or less the same, which comes in handy when editing, especially when like color grading video later on. So that's good. Okay, then there is the 15-stop solid ND, which is brown, and then this black filter here is the 20-stop. Now these filters are so dark that when you put one on, and look at the image on the back of your camera, it looks like you put a lens cap on. They are that dark. The camera cannot meter, it cannot use autofocus. You're not going to see a live preview on the back of your camera. You're probably not going to be able to use any of the automated like aperture priority or shutter priority modes, anything like that. You are going to have to use the bulb mode on your camera so that you're then able to open and close the shutter remotely and manually for however long is necessary in order to achieve proper exposure. How much time are we talking about here? Well, I tested both the 15 and the 20 stop solid NDs for color cast by shooting a color chart, and the 15 stop solid ND to achieve proper exposure, the same exposure as my control image, that had a shutter speed of just over 2 minutes. But the 20 stop solid ND, rather incredibly, required a shutter speed of just over an hour, which is a very long time. And when you're leaving the shutter open for that long, probably get some noise because of the digital sensor and how it works. I mean, you may see some dead pixels in your shot. You may have some problems like that. I certainly did in mine, but that's the kind of thing that, you know, you can clean up. And I would imagine it's something that astrophotographers probably often have to contend with anyway. Now, in case you're wondering, how did I know to leave my shutter open for, 2 minutes and 1 hour and 10 minutes in order to achieve proper exposure? Well, that's not the kind of thing you can do in camera, at least not with the cameras that I have. So for me, I use photo pills. I rely on that, and that's really easy. You just set, you just input the exposure settings for your control, for your image shot without a filter, and then you add in however many stops of ND you're currently using, and then it'll tell you how long the shutter speed needs to be in order to achieve equal exposure. The reason for 15 and 20 stop in these higher densities is for super long exposure photography. Like, let's say that you want to just completely obliterate the sky. Like, you want the sky to be completely smooth. You want the water in your shot to be completely smooth. You are doing some type of architectural or travel photography, something like that. And you're in a place where there's people walking around, like a place like, I don't know, Venice, something like that. You can shoot super long exposure images and effectively remove all of those people from your shot and get an empty square and get an image of just the architecture without any people milling around, because your shutter remained open so long and because you were using one of these super dark solid NDs. Okay, then there are the linear gradients. Now, these are circular linear gradients, and you can use these by themselves if you want to. Like, you can just throw them on like so and use them independently. But some of you will likely use these with a solid ND. So I can throw like a 3-stop on and then put on the linear gradient. Now, these linear grads, if you've never used a linear grad on a camera, they're similar to using the linear gradient tool in Lightroom or some other photo editing app. As a matter of fact, I mean, this is what those tools were basically modeled after. And the reason that people use these is for the exact same reason that you would use one when editing your image thereafter, because then you were able to darken, one particular area of your shot. For example, you could use a linear grad to darken the sky or the foreground in front of you. Like if the ground is highly reflective, you can throw a linear grad on the camera, line it up just right, and then you are equalizing the exposure in your shot. Now, I think in some ways, these linear grads they're kind of a holdover from the old days of film, pre-digital photo editing and technology, because back then we didn't have, like local adjustment tools in Lightroom. We didn't even have Lightroom back then. Everything had to be done in camera. So I think there's a certain like generation of people that are accustomed to linear grads and like using them in order to achieve more optimal images straight out of camera, because it's what they're accustomed to. They don't mind using them. But in some ways, these are inferior to more modern tools, to more modern ways of doing it. Because, for example, you could bracket your exposure. You could shoot multiple exposures, do an HDR, do a composite in Photoshop, and do a brighter one and a darker one, and then just mask in the darker one as needed to achieve an effect similar to what a linear grad can do. Or you can just throw a linear grad on top of your raw image in Lightroom or Capture One or whatever and get a similar effect. And in some ways, those tools are actually superior, because then you're able to apply masks, because then you're able to just apply the linear gradient to the sky, but not to the mountain in front of it, or not to the tree that's in front of the sky. You've probably had to contend with that before, right? Now, another reason why linear grads may not be optimal for you, and one of the reasons why they can be a little bit of a pain, is in situations where you are using them with a polarized filter. For example, I have the linear polarizer mounted here. Well, if you have both a polarized filter and one of these linear grads on your camera, Well, then you have two filters that both have to be independently rotated to their optimum position. I have to rotate the polarized filter to achieve, maximum polarization, the optimum angle relative to wherever the sun is. That's the first requirement. And then whenever I figure out what that angle is, then I have to put on the linear grad, hold the polarized filter, and then independently move this linear grad into position in order to get the level just right and the line just right. So they are rather difficult to turn, and it's really a pain, honestly, holding on to this polarized filter and moving this linear grad at the same time. So yeah, not a fan with that. And the other limitation of a circular linear grad compared to, say, a rectangular one is that, as you may know, with a rectangular or square filter, you're able to push that filter in however far you want the effect to be, or, lift it back up or come in through the bottom and, push it in and out of the filter holder in order to get, just the right gradient, just the right, density of gradient that you're looking for. But with these, it is what it is. Like, you can't push it in or out. And that's why there are two different coverages here. That's why there is 1/2 and 1/3. So they kind of, replicate that ability to push a square filter or rectangular one in and out, but it's not quite the same. Anyway, all that said, circular linear grads aren't for me, but if some of you like them, these are available to you, and these are part of the second wave of Maven filters. Also in Wave 2, there are now dark CPLs, otherwise known as NDPL filters. This is a 3-stop dark CPL, and this is a 6-stop dark CPL. And as you can see, both of them look blue, but on the outside, on their rings, this one has like red notches on it, and this one has that lavender color. So red equates to the 3-stop solid ND, and the lavender equates to the 6-stop solid ND. So even when you're looking for a dark CPL, you can tell, one from another when you're looking for one in your camera bag. These are similar to a solid ND, except these use polarized glass. These are effectively circular polarizers that have been tinted to mimic the behavior of a solid ND. So instead of mounting both a solid ND and a circular polarizer to the front of your lens, you can use just one filter that has the benefits of both. So it'll allow you to both, slow down the shutter speed of your camera just like a solid ND would, but it also provides the benefits of a polarized filter of a circular polarizer by helping minimize reflections and glare, increasing clarity, increasing color density, and so on. Now, the good news about these dark CPLs from Maven is that color accuracy wise, they are good. I mean, they do perform quite well. I think the main reason for buying these is if you want both, the ability to slow your shutter and help mitigate reflections, help increase clarity. If you are, say, a landscape photographer, this is a very convenient filter to have in your bag. Okay, another new type of magnetized filter in this Wave 2 collection from Maven is a linear polarizer, otherwise known as an LPL filter, which is similar to a circular polarizer, otherwise known as a CPL. Now, the main reason why you're probably familiar with a CPL, but you've probably never heard of an LPL filter before is because CPL filters are more compatible with the range of cameras that are out there. You can use this on anything. You can use it on a film camera, a DSLR camera, a mirrorless camera like this one here, and it'll work perfectly fine. Whereas a linear polarizer, because of how they filter light, how they polarize light, LPL filters historically have caused problems on DSLRs. They interfere with the function of the mirror, and oh man, that's a deep rabbit hole to go into. It's really not worth it. But these LPL filters have no problems on mirrorless cameras because there's no mirror. So you now have the option, if you shoot mirrorless primarily, of using an LPL or a CPL. And the benefits of the LPL from Maven is that this one uses a different type of polarized glass that is more color accurate. Polarized filters almost always contribute some amount of color cast to your image, whereas this LPL filter is very clean. This filter is very color accurate. It effectively looks like a solid ND. Another thing that's really interesting about these magnetized polarized filters from Maven is the following. So check this out. If we let's just take a 3-stop dark CPL, And now let's take the linear polarizer and we can magnetically mount it to the front of that. What do we have? Well, we effectively have a variable ND because as some of you may know, a variable ND uses 2 panes of polarized glass, which is exactly what we have here. We have the LPL in front and we have the 3-stop dark CPL in the back. And like a variable ND, if we rotate the front pane of polarized glass, your exposure gets brighter or darker as you rotate this filter around in front of the other. If we take this off, we can now throw the 6-stop dark CPL on, put the LPL filter on in front of that, and now we have another variable ND. And by the way, you can also do this with the CPL. If you already have a CPL, just put the CPL on, the LPL on in front of that, and now you have another variable ND. You effectively have another option for darkening your exposure. Or of course, you can get 2 LPL filters and do the same. Which is interesting from a technical perspective, from like a scientific perspective, but in practical use, it's probably not the best option. I mean, there are certainly better options, more user-friendly options out there. This is really just like a nice, and I think just interesting, a value add with these polarized filters from Maven that you can technically do, whether you would practically use them this way or not. I don't know. I wouldn't. Maybe you would. Maybe you would have some use for it. But I think I mentioned this earlier. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of VNDs in general. I prefer solid NDs. So for me, this I probably wouldn't really use it that way. But it is interesting. And then there are new magnetized step-up rings and just regular adapters too that have splash guard filters built into them. And this is really cool because if you're like most photographers, well, at least the responsible ones, if you're like most, you probably have some kind of UV filter, something on the front of your lens to protect it against damage and dust. Usually in that situation, you have to take the UV filter off and then put on, a magnetized mount when you are using filters. And then you have to take all that off and then put the UV filter back on, which is, yeah, it's kind of a pain. It slows you down, right? Well, with these new designs that have the splash guard filter inside of them, you can just leave the step-up ring or the magnetized mount. You can just leave them on your camera lenses at all times with and without filters. You can just leave it on because it has that splash guard filter inside of it, which, just like a UV filter, protects the front of the lens against damage, against moisture, against anything horrible happening to your lens. So in addition to all of the filters that I covered in this video, and I covered quite a lot, there are still more filters available through their Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign page, which you can check out. They have a new infrared filter, which looks pretty cool. There's also a new astrophotography focusing filter for those of you who are into astro and you want something that'll help you get sharper stars. But as far as these filters here go, in my experience using them, I mean, my opinion of Maven filters really hasn't changed since a year ago. I think they're well designed, well constructed, good optics. They perform well. I love their magnetized setup. And once you get a few filters and you have the adapter ring and you have some step-up rings for your various lenses, using them is so easy for photo and video work because you can just pop them off and put them on a different lens, and really, really easy to use when you're out in the field. I still like the color system though. I do feel like this concept, like this idea of color coding each individual filter and putting patterns on them and all this kind of stuff, I do feel like there's like a limit to its usefulness. Like there's a point at which, like maybe it's because I just have so many of them now, but there's a point at which you kind of look at a filter and you're like, okay, wait a minute, like which one is this again? You have to look at the labels on the back, as you would just with a regular gray filter. So, there is a point at which it may no longer be useful, and maybe we're already at that point and it starts to feel a little stretched. But in general, I mean, it still works, and I think it's a very clever and useful way to find just the right filter that you're looking for. So over on the Kickstarter campaign page, there are, a variety of different options that you have for, different filters. You can, pick and choose which filters you want. And you can do that by following the link down below in the video description to learn more. That's it for me. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I will see you next time.